This episode of Return to Tradition was brought to you by the Saintmaker Catholic Life Planner Toolkit, a resource using Catholic wisdom and modern science to help you achieve that sanctity God is calling you to. Thousands of Catholics are on the Saintmaker journey, and you can join them with a 90-day risk-free trial offer backed with a 100% refund guarantee. Go to www.thesaintmaker.com/return to tradition to learn more and use promo code return to tradition to save 10%. Given Francis's advanced age and his poor physical state, the Catholic media has been speculating on who they think the next Supreme Pontiff could be. I'll cover these stories from time to time because they are interesting, especially since they're often written by veteran Rome observers who understand the dynamics of papal politics better than most of us do. But to be sure, they're often making their own case for who they think should be Pope. Today I have a story on the nightmare prospect of an English pope following Francis, someone who would almost certainly be a Pope Francis II, even if he never assumed that papal name. And this cardinal is very well known to everyone watching who has followed the story of Francis's attempt to bury the Apostolic Mass. That cardinal is, of course, Arthur Roche, and the idea that he would ever become pope seems like a ludicrous concept until the case is made for his being seen as prematurely in the eyes of the cardinals who make such choices. Because here is the thing. He is seen as prematurely, which just means seen as being capable of being pope. He is very much seen that way due to his work in the Roman Curia. And who better to warn us about the prospects of the most eligible English cardinal becoming pope than an English outlet? So from the Catholic Herald, we get this headline: Cardinal Roche and the Future of the Latin Mass. Now, you might be thinking, oh, what has he done this time? Don't worry, nothing so far. There hasn't been a major Marian feast day for Roche and Francis to soil by hammering the faith. Here, the Herald is making the case for a Roche pontificate, a, dare I say, Papa Roche. From the article, quote, as Simon Caldwell recently argued in the Catholic Herald, British prelate Cardinal Arthur Roche is now a potential candidate to succeed Pope Francis. As Caldwell argued, there is now a real prospect of a second English pope, and one who was also chosen to deliver a fawning speech of welcome and thanksgiving during the ceremony to replenish the College of Cardinals. Failing that, the cardinal could be in the running to succeed Cardinal Nichols as Archbishop of Westminster, which would give him an even more prominent role in his home country. In the meantime, the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments is increasingly being whispered in Vatican circles as a possible compromise candidate who could emerge from a conclave to choose a successor to Pope Francis. But for many traditionalists, Roche, the Vatican's liturgy chief, is anything but a compromise figure. If anything, as Caldwell writes, in restricting access to the traditional Latin Mass, he has distinguished himself as a continuity candidate, a reformer fully of the mold of Francis and his particular interpretation of the Second Vatican Council. According to the Pope's Traditionis Custodes, priests who wish to celebrate the old liturgy must get permission from a bishop who will determine both time and location, while new parishes cannot be exclusively dedicated to the TLM. Of course, this worries traditionalists who see the Pope's actions on the traditional Latin Mass as a line in the sand. Yet, writes Caldwell, Cardinal Roche has powerful allies, and some of them are within the Curia, making his prematurely status even stronger. End quote. That's actually putting the case mildly. Roche was the man who wrote the Responsus ad Dubia, a response to an alleged dubia written by Traditionis Custodes by a mysterious bishop or group of bishops that no one ever saw or ever got wind of, and the document itself was never made public until Roche published the Vatican's response to it on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which was, yes, a major Marian feast day. Again, they like to go after traditional Catholics on major Marian feast days, which I demonstrated in a video back in spring. They have a knack for this. It's kind of unsettling. Traditionis Custodes was issued on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Pachamama-related events, including the commemorative coins issued to celebrate Pachamama, happened on major Marian feast days, except for the initial Pachamama event, which happened on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. The Rome modernists don't appear to like Our Lady much, or the traditionalist devotion to her. But back to the prospect of the Papa Roche. There's only been one English pope in history. Nicholas Breakspere was elevated to the papacy in 1154 and took the name Adrian IV. He's not typically remembered as one of the better pontiffs in history, having put all of Rome under a papal interdict, meaning no church activities could happen in the city. That had to do with an anti-papal forces in Rome at the time who were causing trouble for the papacy, and his actions helped get rid of them, but putting an interdict on Rome nearly bankrupted the city of Rome because the city relied on the spending of the faithful on pilgrimage to the Holy See for much of its revenue. There are other reasons he's not fondly remembered, but here the herald is making a point of suggesting that Roche could follow him into the papacy, making for the prospect of a second English pope who would also be pretty bad. Continuing, though, with the article here, quote, Roche is seen by many traditionalists as being at the forefront of moves to undermine the TLM, which came to prominence recently with the conversion of Shia LaBeouf. While Cardinal Roche as Pope could moderate his position, it seems likely that he would guarantee consistency with his current approach. Studies, meanwhile, suggest Latin Mass attendees are more observant and more likely to attend services than those who attend regular Mass. Studies also suggest those who attend the TLM are more likely to subscribe to traditionalist views, while something Pope Francis was no doubt aware of in his decrees. Moreover, as Cindy Wooden wrote for the Catholic News Service, and as reported by America Magazine, quote, Roche is a key figure in what is offhandedly known as the Catholic Church's liturgy wars. The Pope superseded Benedict XVI 2007 Summorum Pontificum, which acknowledged the right of priests to say the TLM without permission. Roche told CNS in 2022 that while the Church's prayer should not be a battlefield, it is understandable that people are passionate, but the right is not simply a matter of personal preference. The prelate went on to say, this is not the Pope's Mass, it's not my Mass, it's not your Mass. This is the Mass of the Church. He added, this is what the Church has decided how we express ourselves as a community in worship, and how we imbibe from the books of the liturgy the doctrine of the Church. The differences between the pre-Vatican II and post-Vatican II Masses, he says, are not simply the use of Latin, for instance. According to Cardinal Roche, the promotion of the pre-Vatican II liturgy as more holy or prayerful is not basically a liturgical problem, but an ecclesial one. For Roche, the modern Mass reflects and reinforces the Church's understanding of itself as the people of God, quote, given to us by the Council, which classified, concretized the teaching of the Church about itself and its understanding of the role of the baptized and the importance of the Eucharist. And the sacramental life of the Church is not without significance for the future of the Church, he stated. Traditionis Custodes is really a call to take the unity of the Church, our being together for the celebration of the breaking of the bread and the prayer very, very seriously indeed, adding that most bishops have greeted the Pope's call back to the Council and also to the unity of the Church with open arms and are very much behind his words, end quote. I think he's right. They are very much behind what he's done. If Roche has been anything since his elevation to the now dicastery for divine worship, since it did get rebranded by Francis, he's been a company man through and through, a party man. He's repeated the line and repeated it faithfully that the Second Vatican Council called for a new Mass, which it did not do, though, and that they did it because the Council changed what the Church was. The Council changed the Catholic faith into something new, which is a heck of an admission if you think about it. He says that the Council wanted and needed a new liturgy that reflected this new religious identity for the Catholic Church. Roche has said this numerous times, so he never says it quite as bluntly as I put it. Here's an example of this from earlier this year. America Magazine ran this from then Archbishop Roche on this excuse for hammering the faith. You're going to hear very similar things to what he just was quoted from the Catholic Herald. Quote, that which was given to us by the Council, which classified, again, concretized the teaching of the Church about itself and its understanding of the role of the baptized and the importance of the Eucharist and the sacramental life of the Church, is not without significance for the future of the Church, he said. And the bishops gathered for the Second Vatican Council, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said, this is the direction in which we are going, Archbishop Roche said. So, Traditionis Custodes is really a call to take the unity of the Church, our being together for the celebration of the breaking of the bread, and the prayer very, very seriously indeed. Despite lots of blustering on the blogs, Archbishop Roche says he is convinced that the majority of Latin Rite bishops and majority of Latin Rite Catholics around the world understand the importance of praying and celebrating the Eucharist with the same Mass. Through the regular contact with bishops and bishops' conferences, he said, he knows most bishops have greeted the Pope's call back to the Council and also to the unity of the Church with open arms and are very much behind what the Holy Father is saying. Obviously, people have preferences, the Archbishop said, but Catholics need to look more deeply at what they are saying when they express those preferences. When people say, well, I'm going to Father so-and-so's Mass, well, Father so-and-so is only the agent. It is Christ who is active in the Mass. It is the priest who acts in persona Christi, the person of Christ, the head of the Church, he said, end quote. He's not wrong about a lot of that, but that's actually why a lot of us are so furious with the state of the Church and the liturgy. By saying that our allegiance to the faith as it was before the Council is a mere act of preference or personal taste is revealing. I don't think he's lying or trying to misrepresent our position. I think he simply doesn't understand it, or why we want the same rigid faith as our ancestors instead of this spiritual winter they foisted upon the Church since the 1960s. And the liturgy is definitely tied to the spiritual winter. But this brings me back to the basic question. What would a Papa Roche bring to the Church? More of the same, or would he be more moderate? His track record is, frankly, less than stellar, to say the least. Back in ancient history, in 2019, Archbishop Roche was the man behind the change of the wording of the Lord's Prayer in Italian. Do you remember that story? The Italian bishops had requested that the Vatican make the change to the prayer Jesus taught to be more inclusive than what Jesus himself wrote, because apparently, for 2,000 years, Jesus, and by extension, the Church, got that prayer wrong. It wasn't good enough for the Italian bishops, and Roche was happy to comply. In 2021, Cardinal Sarah resigned from his position in the Congregation for Divine Worship, and Archbishop Roche succeeded him, having previously not only improved, quote-unquote, the prayer Jesus wrote in Francis's eyes, but also having allowed the bishops' conferences to have the authority to translate and authorize their own translations of the Novus Ordo Mass, which had never been allowed previously for obvious reasons. That was his first major undoing of the work of Joseph Ratzinger, but would not be the last. Of course, you know that he was behind Traditionis Custodes and the responses ad dubia and various anti-Mass statements made since then. But Archbishop Roche's record is clear. The new religion requires a new liturgy and new prayers to separate itself from the old. And as Papa Roche, there is no reason to believe that he just simply would not continue to cut the faith into pieces in this way. I understand why the English would want him to be Pope, I do. In that same way that many decent American Catholics would be overjoyed in Cardinal Blaise Cupich becoming Pope. The English want one of their own on the throne of Peter, and he's the most eligible for that. I get it, but Roche would be a disaster. That article gets one thing right. Francis does appear to be preparing him to be taken seriously by the cardinals at the next conclave, since Roche was permitted to address all the cardinals at the recent consistory, which simply cannot be understated since the cardinals were themselves not permitted to meet together as a whole body, which would have permitted them to, meet one another, get to know each other, get to know, the personalities and quirks of each other just a little bit, which has traditionally been seen as kind of essential to running a future conclaves and choosing the future Supreme Pontiff when that time comes. Plus, Roche's role in the Roman Curia is very, very, very high profile, with consequences for the Church that simply cannot be understated. Does that make him a shoo-in to be the next Supreme Pontiff? Certainly not, but he's always been on my short list as a probable Francis II, including Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal Turkson, and Cardinal Tagle. That is a nightmare rogues gallery lined up for you that you just don't want to see gain any further power in the Church, unless you, like me, are hoping that people get woken up to the state of the Church by how bad things have gotten in the Church because of overt hostility to the authentic faith coming from the papacy itself. Then you'd want that horrible outcome simply because it might be the best remedy for the salvation of souls. I know that's a bitter pill to swallow, but I think it's the truth. What do you think of the prospects of a Papa Roche? Does this suggestion from the English media fill you with dread, or is it just too laughable to take seriously? Let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help, as does sharing these videos on social media. That helps a lot as well. As always, pray for the Church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.